It once was a nation that, by my definition, I would call the first superpower. Now, it is nearly a puppet state to the Americans. Today, we're going to be talking about Britain. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, Geopolitics with Tyberius D is brought to you by the wonderful patron crew that is Andrew Wagner, the West Dude, Julia, and Drew. We appreciate your patronage. You guys are great. Today, I'm joined by Daddy Marks. Hi, Marks. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Great to talk about Great Britain.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. At least I hope. Um, Sorry. Just for the audience today, I've had a little bit of a rough day, so Marks is really gonna have to kind of cattle prod me around on this one, making sure I'm up to it. I wish I could do this at a better time, but I'm literally going on vacation here in like 2 days, and I've got everything. My schedule's filled up, so I can't kind of redress and redo this later. Anyway, so let's see if I can fake it until I make it, right? Marks, how was your day, though? Did everything going all right? I thank you for coming on short notice because Justin, I guess, threw you a bone last minute.
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Day's just pretty regular. Been doing schoolwork, but yeah, it's been a regular day.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you for coming to help me out. I don't know what's going on with Justin, but things came up. So, yeah,
hmm
congratulations on Mod, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for warning it to me.
Yeah, it's been warranted. All right,
Okay.
so let's clear this out. We usually do history and we do geography. Is there any part of Great Britain that you think we need to highlight before we begin, or do you want to try to take it somewhere?
Just go over the history because obviously there was England first, but
Hmm.
if you want, you can go over like the history of England. But if you just want to focus on Great Britain, you can just focus on like the unification of the different like kingdoms. So,
Right. You know, actually, I'm gonna rename this episode. I know what it is. We're gonna call it Britannia.
okay.
Um, Ireland's too small to really kind of have its own episode in my opinion. So I'm gonna be a douche and just lump all the British Isles together. So let's separate this out. Uh, the history here is long, and I mean really long. But we have three major areas, and if you want to count Wales in this, you can count four. Or hell, you can even count Cornwall if you want. Um, let's get back to basics. If you really want to push it all the way back into modern history, or I'm sorry, not modern history, but you want to push it all the way back. Britain's history starts all the way back with the Celts, right? This is the same people that will live in Gaul and Gaul, which is France now, and then this will be um, throughout all the British Isles. You'll have the Celts, and the Celts will largely stay there after certain peoples come in and out. So make this full circle. Whoever the Celts were, and there's a lot of different peoples that are the Celts, but they're kind of this ethno-linguistic core group of people that largely settle out in France and Britannia, and to some degree they'll actually get into what do you call this? They'll settle out in a little bits of Iberia and Germany, but they'll get kind of pushed out by other peoples as time goes on. What happens in that kind of brings them forward into modern history is the Romans show up, and the Romans Latinize everybody, and then we call them the Gallic peoples. Is the technical term for these people? They'll be more or less. They won't become full on Latinized, but they'll become like a hybrid. And this is kind of the history throughout most peoples is that usually you have a ethno-linguistic group that lives there. Somebody will come in and basically start usurping over everybody. Either they'll kill like half the population and then they'll just like breed in with the rest, and you eventually get a whole new identity here. That kind of happens with the Gallic people, but nowhere near as much as it would with some other people that are coming down the line. The Romans will rule most of these areas for about 400 years, 300 years, depending on if we're talking about France or Britain. But we'll keep it with Britain here, or Britannia. Is what really happens is that the Romans show up under Caesar. They don't stay, but then Claudius comes in and takes it over. You have basically modern England will be taken over, and then a little bit of Wales, although there's a debate on if Wales was really ever subjugated. There's a reason why their culture is significantly different than what we see later on with the English, and there's a reason why the more Druidic and the Druidic religion and the Celtic languages stay in Wales and even Cornwall all the way up until the more modern ages, up until the last 500 years. So basically, this splits up really nicely and easily. You have England and you have everybody else. That is largely Wales, Ireland, and Scotland that kind of separate from each other. Because England is the good part of Britannia. We'll talk about that in the geography section. But the history kind of divulges because of that. Excuse me. Anyway, where we take this is that England is conquered by the Romans. You'll actually have Trajan's Wall, which is not exactly, but is relatively close to the borders of England and Scotland today. It does not follow it perfectly. In fact, I'm not sure it follows it directly at any point. But it's in the same general region, and it's because of geography, or at least I would think it is. Excuse me, I don't want to get tired of you. Yeah. Excuse me. All right, sorry about that. So, you have England that's kind of starting to develop as its own institution, its own thing, particularly under the Romans. This will be the reason why we call it Britannia, is the Romans actually called this province Britannia. And that name has stuck ever since. We usually now refer to this area as the British Isles, but there's a difference between Great Britain, Ireland, the British Isles, and Britannia. Like they all have these different like euphemisms and different causes of what they're actually being talked about. So let's move forward. As the Romans start going to crap by a death of 1,000 cuts, is that there's massive migrations of Germanic peoples that comes into this region. The same thing happens in Gaul or France, is that these Germanic peoples come in and they basically usurp over everybody else. But instead of like the Latins, where the Latin people will kind of rule the place and like a little bit integrate, these people will come in, move here, and literally set down their roots, and they will literally either kill or breed in with the natural people that are still there, and they will make their own ethno-linguistic people or subgroups. The people that we're concerned with here in Britain is the Angles and the Saxons. And you may notice this term very, very strongly because this is what eventually becomes Anglo-Saxon. What this happens to be is that basically it is a Celtic, Latin, Germanic mix, and it actually get mixed up even more as time goes on. We'll get there here in a second, but you start seeing the formation of what the Germanic invasions does. And just if anyone's watched our other episodes, you can check those out. We haven't done Spain yet, which we need to, but if you watch our Germany episode, we talk a little bit about this. We watch our France episode, we really talked about this with the Merovingians. But what happens is that these people come out of what is modern Germany and Holland, and they basically are either pushed out themselves or they have such high population because over carrying capacity because of I can't remember what it's called, but there's about 100 years where everything goes to crap in Europe, and
the Dark Age?
No, this is before it. This is the 300s, late 200s, 300s. I can't remember what it is. It's like a little ice age, but the little ice age is the 1300 to 1400. Like
the climate. Yeah, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a climate change, and it screws up a lot of things that are going on. For about 100 years, it gets a little colder than usual, and crop failures happen, and all this other stuff. But you see a great migrations really start, and it won't finish until the 400s. But even with that, like there's still like some residuals where you'll have the Vandals and the Franks and all the Visigoths and all these people roll in to Western Europe, and they'll basically just do. Basically, these Germanic people will come in and they will rewrite everything about what is going on in Western Europe. The Latins will no longer be Latin. Literally, the Celtiberians, I believe, is what they call the people in Iberia at this point. They won't be them anymore. The Gallic people will no longer be Gallic. They'll actually become the Franks, which will be France. And then you get the Anglo-Saxons up in Britannia, which is more particularly, let's just call it's England. So you get the Angles and you get the Saxons. You get a few other people that come in here. And, they set up shop. They start building out their own civilization, if you will. There's so much history here. I could literally go on forever. I'm going to jump a bit around here, and I'm sorry. So what you have is that eventually you have post-Rome. You have these successor kingdoms such as Wessex, Mercia, Northumberland that come up, and they're small little like titular kingdoms. I believe that's the correct word for it. And they're just competing and vying for dominance. Eventually, what happens is the Great Invasion. I can't remember what they call this. I think it is the Great Invasion, or the Norse invasion or something along that line, but this is the invasion of Ivar the Boneless and the Vikings in the 800s. This is just after Charlemagne dies in France, where the Viking Age really starts taking off. Correction, if I remember right, this actual invasion's in 860, which is 50 years after Charlemagne dies. But what's a few decades in this time era, right? Right? No, I'm kidding. Basically, the Viking Age starts in about the 800s, but then you get the Great Heathen Army? Is what it's called? I can't remember.
I'm looking. It just says the Viking invasion of the British Isles. That's what
it has a name.
Hold on.
I can't remember what it is. I think it is the Great Heathen Army. Yes, it is the Great Heathen Army that forms the Danelaw. So the Great Heathen Army comes in, and this is Ivar the Boneless and another of other people that are basically coming out of Norway and Denmark at this point. Of course, it's not Norway and Denmark then; it hasn't been Christianized. But anyway, they come over and they basically will set up shop, and it's weird because you get a little mix of the Norse in here as well. They'll come in and they'll do the same as the Angles and the Saxons did, and you'll have in Northumberland and particularly Mercia, what those kingdoms, they'll get taken over by the Vikings, and they'll become what is known as the Danelaw, which is basically sorry, just replying to a chat. Anyway, where was I? You have the Danelaw, which is basically the same thing that we'll kind of see with the Normans here in a little bit, where you have like this aristocracy that's kind of taken place, which is Viking, but most of the people are still ethnically, I believe it's Saxon. I can't remember exactly, but okay, they're more or less Anglo-Saxon. They'll call themselves the what is it that they call themselves at this point? We'll just say Anglo-Saxon, right? They'll basically be that, and then you'll have one major kingdom that's still left that doesn't get integrated to the Danelaw, and that's Wessex. So what happens is Danelaw's strong. It lasts about 80 years, but it slowly comes apart because it's one of these deals to where we start to see really strongly ethno-nationalism really take place in Western Europe on a big level. People just don't like foreigners. And there is this big interconnection in the Danelaw between having domestic rulers that are, kind of came over with the immigration and live there versus people off in Denmark and Norway who are trying to rule it. And this will actually be a problem all the way up into like the late 1200s, 1300s. There's an empire that will form for a quick minute, which has Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and England all as part of one like personal union for a quick second. And this is a remnant of that, and that's 300 years down the line. 500 years down the line. Sorry, excuse me. So the long and the short here is that these things have lasting ramifications. So the Danelaw starts going to shit, and Wessex is one of the first like kingdoms to actually figure out how to build castles, real castles, and they're able to defend themselves from the Viking invasions. And eventually, one of the kings of Wessex basically starts hammering on what is left of the Danelaw afterwards. Which the Danelaw, if I said kind of how it works, but it's not one big country called the Danelaw. It is like all of these some minor kingdoms that have kind of been put in together that are kind of just treated as a unison thing, but they're really not. And what this king is able to do is he's able to like play them off each other and slowly pull the Danelaw apart over about, I think it's 20 years, and he'll largely conquer it all to where he will be called the first king of England, which, as we now know, is England. And you get the formation of England in the early 900s. So we have England, and then you'll have the land of the Pictlin, which is up north. We call this Scotland now. And there's a bit of a thing that happens to make them Scottish. Largely it's Christianity. Kind of the same thing with the Irish, but the culture doesn't change to near the degree that England's does, because England likes to get invaded. Scotland gets invaded every now and again. They actually have to fight off a Norwegian once or twice here and there, but more often than not, they're able to just keep everybody at a distance. So, that brings us into William the Conqueror. So after a quick minute of England being its own independent nation, is that there's a secession crisis in England to where there's not any official ruler. And so you have Harold Hardrada, the King of Norway, William the Bastard, the Duke of Normandy, and what is his name? The guy that dies. He beats Harold, but then he loses to William. I can't remember his name. I apologize. I would usually get this, but I'm a little too tired. Anyway, this guy dies, and he was the guy that actually kind of came to rule England for a quick second there, but the claim was disputed. William the Conqueror takes over, and he basically puts all of England into very nice. Sorry, I'm talking with the graphics editor on the side. Anyway, you have England as the way they kind of see it. There's a weird thing about English history to where they still think of themselves as the same country, and they will have the same rulers, but you'll have like a completely different flip between William the Conqueror and the people that are before them, because most of them you can't pronounce, like Alfred or Alfred and whatnot. Very Celtic, Anglo-Saxon names, and then all of a sudden you get something that we now think of as more as English, and that is because you get the fusion of these Anglo-Saxons and Normans, which are unironically people that are Frankish and Viking, and so literally you just get like the ethno-linguistic blender that forms England over multiple interactions that make English, particularly just English. It's weird. There's a reason our language has so many root commonalities with the other Germanic and late Latin languages. It's because it's literally just been stacked on top of each other over and over and over again, where they're interwoven and intertwined. And it's why English is so weird compared to so many other languages. Well, it has like common roots in the what is it? Is it Indo-Eurasian or Indo-European? I don't remember. I think it's the Indo-European like language groups. There is an immense strong ties to French and German because it's literally just the intermingling of these so many times over and over and over again, where one kind of usurps the other one and has a new group come in and kind of set the tone. So, after that, let's see, we had William the Conqueror. And we could, I guess we could go down like the Anglican, or the, or was it the Anglican Empire? The Evangelian Empire? I can't remember how it is. England will eventually own not only England but half of France because they're able just to whip the living crap out of them. You get the 100 Years' War that eventually start afterward that will get France all of its land back on the mainland. And England will eventually decide that the only room for themselves to expand is to go off into the New World once they figure out that it's a thing from Spain. And so they'll basically be racing France to do it. This is the time where France is getting crapped on by the HRE in particular, so the English get more of a chance to really work at developing what they're doing very, very well, where France has to play multiple cards at multiple different directions to get to where they want to go. And so, to go full cycle, is that while England is one of the later countries to get in on the colonization game, like Spain beats them, France beats them, Portugal beats them, and they're literally competing with people like the Swedes, is that when it comes full circle, the British, because they are literally or the English, because they're largely a naval power. I mean, they're a land power because they have to fight the Scots and the Irish. Is that at this point, England and Ireland are largely ruled by the English writ large, and we're about 1600, by the way, if anyone's asking. And then the English starts looking out to the rest of the world, and they're like, all right, cool. Well, we've got the colonies and we have a navy. Let's, go full ham on this. And this is the 13 colonies, which will be eventually the United States. And a few other things are happening at the same time. One of the big things that happens, and it's around 1600 at the same time. Yeah, actually it is. It is in 1600 because Virginia is named after the Virgin Queen, which is Elizabeth, which she probably isn't a virgin. Elizabeth I, by the way. So, I can get into a lot of history with the rulers here, like Henry VIII, which is like in the early 1500s, like up to the 1530. He makes the modern British Navy actually start. He actually builds out a professional navy. You have Mary, who is psychotic and marries the King of Spain, and this is how you get the Spanish Armada under Queen Elizabeth I. And then she helps charter the first. She'll be part of what helps charters Jamestown, and then literally we just roll on here. What I'll jump up to is James I of England, which was James VI of Scotland. After Elizabeth dies, if I remember correctly, Elizabeth I, is that she is the last of the Tudor dynasty, and there's no one else to replace her. And they have to go back into the family tree to figure out who's the next ruler. And they figure out the next ruler is already a ruler. He's James VI of Scotland. And so all of a sudden, the Scottish king gets a PU over the English title, the English crown. And so he will largely take over both of them, and they'll be in union ever since. There is a formal act 100 years later to make them formally realized. England and Scotland, under the Act of Union in 1707, to be one formal nation, but it literally took 100 years before people were like, all right, cool, we can be on the same team. And there's still a debate to that to this day. You'll notice that if you look at a British election map, there's a whole party that dominates Scotland, and it's literally a Scottish. It's not a Scottish independence party, but it's a Scottish political party that is particularly geared towards the wants and needs of Scotland. So there's that. Where am I taking this now? We're talking about. We talked about. I'll circle back to the colonization. Colonization proves very, very well for the English. They're able to kind of dominate. And once Ireland's largely subjugated by the time Elizabeth comes to the throne, and then after she dies, you have James which leads to Scotland being part of the of Britannia as well, under the Crown's rule of the British monarchs or the English monarchs. And so, to make a long story short, Britannia is actually united at this point, and they can focus on anyone outside of Britannia, and they no longer have a geopolitical struggle. They have what they need, and they're in a very secure position. They'll fuck this up later, but hey, whatever. Excuse me for the language. I'm not supposed to curse, or at least I try not to. I screw it up. Anyway, trying to be professional here. It's not working out very well. What you have is that Britain is able to just look out amongst the world, and they're able to start expanding very, very rapidly, very, very quickly, particularly around the time that you get the Act of Union. Not to say that there wasn't colonies already there, but it kind of slow rolls. At first, it doesn't go very well. Like the first colony or two fail. Then you get another one, and then another one, and another one, and it starts building out to what we think the 13 colonies are. And then you get really kind of the imperial arms race that starts. You'll get in the 1700s, you'll have the rapid expansion of the British 13 colonies. You'll have them go to India. You'll have them start showing up everywhere. And then you get to the great geopolitical confrontations, where basically England, which is really Britannia at this point, Britannia and France square off in a geopolitical showdown for basically world domination. It's not quite world domination in that regard of they literally tell everyone what to do, but they literally fight over the ability to be a world hegemon, and this is the part where Britain pretty much starts getting away with it, and they become the world's first superpower. I'm not going to tell you where that technically begins, but once you get past the 7 Years' War or Queen Anne's War or whatever you want to call it, or hell, the War of Austrian Secession Part 2, if you want to call it that. The long and the short here is that come 1756, I think that's when the war starts. Come the 1760s, Britain is pretty much superpower status. The only people that will largely not be a thing yet that the British can't really touch is China, which is I can't think it's the Yuan dynasty, but I forget. Oh, crap. I'm sorry. I don't mean to do this all night. Let me keep straight with this. Anyway, to keep going this full circle is that Britain basically now has the ability to reach out across the globe. They are in North America. They've got a little piece here in South America that we call Guyana. They've got different holdings in Africa, particularly what we now know as South Africa. They are building out a massive colonial possession in what we will call India, particularly right now as Bengal. And they'll start touching out into other areas that will eventually become the Malay Peninsula, Indonesia, which is on, I can't remember what this island's called. I think it's Borneo that they'll be on top of. And eventually they'll get out there. And this is in the 1700s, right? Now, there's a bit of a break before they really get into China. There's basically what tends to happen is that you have three major events. Indonesia was in Dutch land. Most of it was, not all of it. You have northern Borneo, if I remember right, the right island is a British claim, and that is now the country of Brunei. But thank you for chat. So anyway, this is 1700s, and what happens is basically three things all at once to kind of, or not all at once, but in quick succession, which will roll in the 1800s, that completely changed the new game. First one is the 7 Years' War, which we talked about a little bit, where the English will fight France in North America, and they'll literally just wipe them off the continent outside of Haiti. And so England takes pretty much everything in North America out east of the Mississippi. There's exceptions to that. I don't want to get into that, but yeah, that's where we are. Mm-hmm. I'm so sorry. I'm getting tired. It's ridiculous. And I've got a panel after this. Ugh. I'm going to need a lot of Dr. Pepper. Anyway, so the next part is the American War of Independence, the American Revolutionary War, whatever you want to call it. the Americans break off and they take the best part of the continent with them. And the Brits really have a confarction in their mind when this happens. Not to say that no one saw it coming. Adam Smith in his books says it's coming. And it's literally published that year. So, like, people can see the writing on the wall. But the long and the short is that America kind of splits off. The British will keep Canada, but it's not nearly as good as the 13 colonies in what will eventually be the American lower 48. The Mississippi River Basin and the Atlantic Seaboard is some of the best geography on the whole damn planet. And if you put it all together, there's a reason the United States is a superpower. Good job, Britain. You goofed up. You lost it. So let me jump to the next part. The Brits have to redouble their efforts on other colonial possessions and making sure they don't lose any of those. Particularly what it is India. They will spend the better part of the next 100 years solidifying their grasp on India and expanding on where they are elsewhere. At the same time, you're seeing largely what you see is expansion in Africa. You see expansion throughout India, and then you get into what is the Western Pacific, which will eventually be Hong Kong and the Opium Wars, which we've talked quite a bit about in the Chinese episode. So go check out the China episode on that one. But the long and the short is that basically Britain will be the first nation to really truly achieve superpower status. And if anyone needs to know what I mean by that, my definition for superpower status is that if you make any kind of political, economic, or military decision, a superpower is a nation that will have the ability to respond in kind anywhere on the planet. I hope that makes sense. It's really weird because it's kind of like coming from a negative, but basically a superpower is a geopolitical entity that has the ability to politically, economically, and or militarily reach out into the world and touch any nation anytime. So Britain's the first to actually ever do this. And you'll have the Opium Wars. You'll have the Geopolitical Confrontations, which I forgot issue number 3 after the American Revolutionary War. So sorry to skip this. Issue number 3 is the Napoleonic or the French Revolutionary Wars, which becomes the Napoleonic Wars as well. Is that basically France goes for European domination instead of like world domination, and Britain will largely hang out until the War of the Seventh Coalition, where they all get where the French get torn down. It's kind of weird in that Britain will largely stick it out because of their geography. They control the navy, so they're not able to get conquered by France, and they'll literally just be at war with them by officially or by proxy the entire time. And eventually you'll have the Duke of Wellington beat Napoleon at Waterloo, and that kind of seals the fate, or the final battle there. And from this point on, Britain will largely be the world superpower for about 110, 20 years. You'll have the Congress of Europe, which keeps things relatively calm in Europe. Well, you'll see a few things here and there. But Britain largely rules the waves. They are the first major nation to industrialize in a macro level. And basically to go full cycle is we're getting into modern Britain and modern Britannia at this point, which is crap baskets. All right, we're in the 1800s. We talked about them just beating up on China. We've talked about them just absorbing into India, and then most of Africa will eventually be conquered, or at least, what is it, like 1/4 of the whole African continent will eventually be claimed and somewhat ruled by Britain. But this is their zenith, right? After losing the Americans, they're kind of starting to not initially, not quickly, but they'll eventually get eclipsed by their own children. That is the United States. Come the end of the 1800s, what we see is Britain is the number one economic power on the planet, but they get passed by the United States in about 1895. And the United States has been the number one economic power since that. So it's really weird because it's literally like Britain had a kid and it was a rebellious teenager and they're just like, screw you, Dad, I'm going to do my own thing. But now the parent has to move back in with the kid. It's really interesting where we're at. So we can just talk about the decline era and kind of wrap this all up, right? Is
Yeah.
that um, what we see is
Rising tensions in Europe, right?
yeah,
There's about to be
it
another war.
is. What really kind of screws everything up is this guy named Otto von Bismarck. He basically forms a nation from Prussia out of nowhere. Prussia is able to unite the 36, 37 principality states in the middle of Central Europe, and all of a sudden you have this new country called Deutschland, or as we call it in English, Germany, and it's huge. It's got literally like 40 million people in 1870. Which just it literally has the industrial, economic, and military strength to take on France and Russia at the same damn time. It's a Leviathan. It's Goliath, and so there's a lot of things that start changing with Britain at this point. Number one is that they are finding geopolitical competitors they can't beat. Um, while they'll still be the dominant naval power for a very long time, Germany is such a threat that the centuries-long blood feud that is between largely France and England, or France and Britain, whatever you want to call it, that really starts with William the Conqueror, it ends because of this. That's how powerful Germany is and how much it scares the living crap out of everybody. Um, And then you get eventually what it obviously is the World Wars. Eventually tensions blow over. You have the Archduke Franz Ferdinand get shot in Sarajevo. World War I goes off. You have the Entente, which is Britain, France, and Russia. The Entente will win. Russia will suffer a complete and total defeat. And France is basically bled white. They'll win, but it's literally the most pure victory ever. And then Britain really just doesn't gain anything out of this. They'll largely be bled white as well. Fast forward 20 years, you get to World War II, and give me a second here. All right.
All right.
Yeah, as far as
I mean,
yeah.
like obviously with like the World Wars and World War II, there must have been like a huge like population loss. They have to spend like a lot of resources,
there
and especially it must be hard like maintaining a global empire as well.
There is and there isn't. The problem with the British Empire at this point is that the reason why it was able to just kick the living crap out of everybody is that was largely an economic entity. So it could pay for everything. It had 40 some ships of the line in 1777 when they come to invade Boston in the American Revolutionary War. And that's not even all of their ships. They literally send that just to against the United States, and each one of them costs as much as a modern American aircraft carrier. That's how expensive they are for that era. So what I'm trying to say here is that the British Empire has a huge purse, and they're able to buy a lot of stuff with it. The problem is that the industrial and like manpower bases that come out with the Industrial Revolution and particularly the formation of Germany, they cannot play the population atrophy games that other nations can. So the British are really, really good at being force multipliers, where they'll do something like having an air force or having a navy, which kills a crap ton of people with minimal cost. But it is not one of those situations to where they can literally just go tit for tat with Germany. They'll have their own troops in France, but let me put this into perspective to you. You have not the entirety, but you have the entirety of the expeditionary forces that Britain can muster into northern France and Belgium during World War I. You have the entire French army on that border, more or less, during World War I. Keep in mind, Britain will have forces in Turkey for a minute there, and Iraq. They'll be spread out. But most of their forces, 3/4 of which, will actually be deployed into Flanders Fields. Wonderful poem, by the way. And you'll also have the French army there, and you'll have the Russians on the other side of Germany. And Germany's fighting them all at the same time. And more or less holding their own, if not winning. There's some seesaw action back and forth there. That's how powerful these wars are getting. Is that more particularly one, Germany just can man lift everybody around them, but also Britain doesn't have the colossal weight to actually take on a mainland European power anymore. They don't have the manpower. They've got the economic power to buy everything, and even that starts getting stretched at the end of the war, or at the particularly in World War II. And they start becoming a subsidiary of the Americans. Particularly in World War I, most of the debts that the British will rack up will actually be from buying American weapons and loans from American investors. And so, go full cycle with this is that come World War II, they're just eclipsed. Germany outcompetes them militarily and economically the entire war. The Russians do as well, and of course the Americans do. And so, while they are the first nation to gain superpower status, they're the first to lose it too. They're still kind of regarded as a superpower at the end of the Second World War and going into the Cold War, but they're literally just drained. They don't have anything going for them anymore, and no one in the empire really wants to be British. The Canadians, the Australians, the New Zealand, the Kiwis, they all have their own self-independent governance, but there's going to be like a walking away from that integration after World War II, where they don't really think of themselves as directly in line, even though they technically still are to this day. South Africa will kind of walk away from this, which turns into apartheid and some nasty stuff. Britain will get India and Pakistan will get independence, which you can check out those episodes, even though my history is a little sketchy on those. And basically, what the final straw is for the British Empire and Britannia, one is that after World War I, one of the kings, and I think it's like Edward the Fourth, could be wrong, allows Ireland to become independent, and that's a crap show, but it becomes a geopolitical nightmare unto itself. And then the really big one is that the British can no longer maintain India in particular, and once that's over, Britain just kind of falls off the radar. Keep in mind that they try to hold it together after India, and because India becomes independent in 47 or 49. Can't remember. I think it's 47. But anyway, the final event that's the death nail for Britain is the Suez Crisis in 56. Britain, France, and Israel invade Egypt in 56 during the Suez Crisis because Egypt has nationalized the canal, and you have to pay Egypt directly to use a canal now instead of just a British puppet company. That doesn't go over well with the Europeans too much. Even with Britain losing its empire at this point, is that they want ready and open access to the Middle East. I bet you can't guess why. And it goes full cycle to where the Americans and the Soviets basically tag team up together and say, look, we don't like you doing this. The Americans are extra pissed off on this one because they didn't get consulted. They're just like, we're your allies, and let's just be honest here, we pull the weight around here, so if you ever want to go do something like this again, we're going to feed you to the wolves. Within 10 years, the entire British Empire is gone. So that's kind of where we are now, is that, by the 1960s, you have full decolonization, and you have the modern borders of Britain formed today. We have two countries, technically, that is the United Kingdom of Great Britain, or the United Kingdom, the technical definition, the United Kingdom of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and then you have Ireland, which is confusing as hell, right? So, here we are. We are in the modern era. I don't really think there's anything to actually add after this, because it's literally just the United Kingdom being a subservient member of the American hegemony alliance system. So, I have blown 44 minutes in just history. Hooray! Does anyone have any questions here before we move on to the geography real quick?
not saying I in chat, but I hold my questions because yeah, we had to get the history and then the future. So
We're not going to do the future that much. I kind of just table that because all my forecasts went to hell after the Chinese and the Americans are like, yeah, let's go for Cold War II Electric Boogaloo. So I'm not. I'm kind of tabling the future, at least for a
okay,
while.
let's go to geography. Then.
Yeah, the geography is actually pretty solid. They don't have the resources that we see for a late stage industrial country, particularly oil and some of their more rare earth metals. But they did have a lot of coal and a lot of things that you really want to start an industrial nation with: coal, timber, that kind of thing. As far as agriculture, it's not bad. It's just English agriculture is weird. It just doesn't have a lot to it. The primary meat that they consume is lamb of all things, right? And then as far as their just dietary, it's more fruits and vegetables, or more vegetables than anything else, which is fine. But there's a lot of stew. There's a lot of things getting mixed together. And I'm gonna be honest, the worst cooks in the world are English. I'm sorry, like these people have no taste, or like their cuisine is just it's the most bland stuff ever.
Hey, isn't Gordon Ramsay English?
He is, but he's trained in French cuisine. So while there is some signature dishes that are like English, like a Wellington, like do you know what a Wellington is? It's literally a steak wrapped in mushroom powder, or like diced mushrooms, wrapped in like a pastry, and just like, all right, cool, whatever. Um, so yeah, uh, pretty much everyone agrees that British cooking is terrible, especially the French. So,
Uh,
geography, yeah,
yeah.
is Oh yes, chat. Thank you for doing that. They're absolutely in love with pudding. I don't know. I don't understand. It literally looks like sludge, and it's like, yep, I'm gonna eat sludge. Um, but anyway, their geography is decently good. It's a temperate climate. It doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too cold. It has pretty nice winters, pretty nice summers. Um, it's relatively high. Remind you that like London is at the same uh, what's the called on the hemisphere. It's at the same latitude. Yeah, same latitude as like Ottawa, right? So it's all relatively high up, but because of the the Atlantic jets, or not the Atlantic jet stream, the Atlantic conveyor belt, or the Atlantic thermal belt that drops a shit ton of heat from the lower Atlantic up to the higher Atlantic, is that basically warms up Europe, and um, it provides quite a bit of heat. But this is where all this rain comes from that you hear of in England, is that it evaporates off of the North Atlantic, and it basically just forms storm after storm after storm after storm after storm. Um, and so, to a long story short, here is that their geography generally is that I need to go full cycle on this crap. I just kind of realized Ireland sucks. It rains constantly. It's really rocky. It's really hard to grow anything there. Potato famine aside, that's one of the few things they can actually grow there. The soil is kind of rough. Scotland is literally mountainous to the level of the Rocky Mountains, or maybe just a little smaller. If you want to go more like bigger Appalachian mountains, it's rough. So you can't really, you can only hunker down there. That's actually why no one's really ever been able to conquer Scotland writ large. It's really good to hunker down into. England's the really good part. It's warm enough in the winter, I'm sorry, it's warm enough in the summer that it gets up in the like 80 degrees. It's cold enough in the winter to kill all the bugs. You can grow quite a bit. You can grow quite a bit of stuff as we go, and so. Yeah, there's all that. You didn't have to do that, Marks. I hit it because they were earlier, because it just was coming off as incredibly rude. But anyway, going full cycle, I think we've largely covered it. The geography's pretty good, but we're largely talking for England. Outside of England, it really just sucks. Climate's same. There's some resources there, but it's more for pre or early industrial economics, not late industrial economics. You don't see as much of a proficiency to actually build out like synthetic polymers and oils and all this other stuff. So, if you have any
Uh,
questions, feel free to do so before I jump out of here.
yeah. So like you said, like their geography overall is like okay, it's good to like build on stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then what would you say? Because I know you're really into geography and you think it really empowers the nation.
Mm-hmm.
What then do you think really empowered Britain to be so powerful and to have this global superpower status? Was it geography? Was it technology? What do you think?
A bit of both, actually. So the biggest thing here, and I'm going to paraphrase off of Zion here, is something called deep water navigation, which comes out of Iberia for a minute there, and that is basically the idea of being able to get away from the coastline without literally freaking out and dying horribly, because the only way that before that to do deep water navigation was dead reckoning, which is literally looking up at the stars and going ooh ah, right. Um, so you can do that, that's fine, but you usually tend to get lost and die horribly. When you figure out how to use a compass, when you figure out how to use I can't remember, it's the thing you throw off the side of your boat, and you can figure out how many fathoms it goes down. Once those techniques are developed, they're largely developed in Iberia, but they get to the Brit or to the English. Iberia is kind of nice because 7/8 of it is surrounded by water, but all of Britannia is surrounded by water, and so they're even more navally adept than the Iberians are, and they actually can generate more capital from England. And so, bring this full conversation cycle forward is that England has a decent ability to generate capital. They have a secure geographic border or geopolitical border when they basically put all of Britannia under their aegis, which puts quite a bit of resources under their tame, and then they can literally pick and choose where and when to engage people. And one of the big things that they'll actually be able to do is they won't fight France in France anymore because they know they're going to lose that fight, but they can go fight them in anyone's colonies, and they can pretty much just whip the living crap out of them because their navy can usually go 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 on anybody. And then their land forces can largely just come in and mop up. Doesn't mean they're always going to win, but for like the 200 years that Britain kind of trades on off as being at war, the British will win more wars than they lose.
Hmm. For like geography sense, like comparing it to like the United States, to where because not only because of its military strength, but because of its geography, it's very hard or if not impossible to like conquer all of the United States. Same with like Russia, various nations, maybe like Switzerland, stuff like that. Is the United Kingdom like that in some senses? It's like an island, or what would you rate its geography in that sense? Does it have like a natural protection because of it?
Yeah, that literally is what it is that it is an island, and islands being that you have to literally navally invade them. And it kind of works in the same way that Switzerland does, is that Switzerland is really hard to invade because it's literally all mountains, right? The difference between Ireland and Britain's bigger. It actually has muscle behind it, as in it generates capital. It can generate a functional military, and from going out there further, is that whenever somebody actually goes into a knockdown, drag out fist fight with them, is that what's the word here? You can actually have a legitimate fight. Um,
Hmm.
On that note, I really got to wrap this up, guys. I've got a panel that I'm a little bit actually overdue for. We're at 53 minutes, so it's a pretty good episode all the way. If you have any questions, you know where to hit it. LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. You can find me there. If you find my other content on Twitch, YouTube, and the podcast. Let me know if you guys are liking this. I'm sorry I'm a little tired, but I got to close this out. So thank you all very much for watching, and we'll catch you later. Thank you very much, Marks.
Yeah, that's okay.